Thanks everyone for coming out to the final event of the spring semester series. Tonight, of course, we have Emily Mohr, Knowlton's 2018-2019 LeFevre Fellow. I don't know why I'm holding that, but who will say a few things about the work she's been doing this year, followed by the opening of her exhibition, Drawing Drawings, which you're all sitting on right now. Emily, I don't think needs much of an introduction. All told, she's been here longer than most of us. I think she's a graduate of Knowlton Architecture and the Graduate School of Architecture Planning Preservation at Columbia University, where she earned an MArch and was awarded the AIA Henry Adams Medal. In 2017, Emily founded the Practice MR Studio along with John Rickey, and the same year, both Emily and John came back to Knowlton to serve as the Migg Urban Visiting Professors at the Knowlton School. Prior to returning to Knowlton, Emily has worked for a host of architectural practices, including Big, Bureau Spectacular, and her work has recently been exhibited at Columbia University and the A&D Museum in Los Angeles. Now, if you've had the chance to see Emily's seminar last spring, the current work of her senior studio or the design work of MR Studio, you may have a sense that Emily is preoccupied with drawing and that her recent work has evidenced an interest in the relationship between drawing techniques and a host of pavilions, competition proposals, and small single-family residences. Now, maybe some of you know that the ACSA conference just happened a few weeks ago, and I was talking with someone about this conference, and we were joking about what seems to be the imperative of every ACSA conference, to devote something like 2/3 of its sessions to the question of drawing. Or slightly more regressively, questions like what happened to drawing, why doesn't anyone draw anymore, how do we start drawing again, et cetera, et cetera. And these are types of questions that have been around now for something like a quarter of a century, at least since the prevalence of computer drafting and modeling platforms, and presume that drawings are both essential to the nature of architecture itself and largely distinct from the computational drafting processes that have become ubiquitous in schools and offices. These questions have attempted to reconcile the simple fact that while drawing has historically been one of the means through which architecture renders itself distinct from adjacent practices like construction or the visual arts, it's also something that seems less and less like the computationally driven procedures through which most architectural work now occurs. Now, without casting any aspersions on those types of questions, and potentially, which are potentially important and useful, what I find very interesting about Emily's work is that her questions don't seem to be these more familiar ones. Rather, they indicate an emerging response to the problem of drawing from a generation of practitioners who have never known anything but drawing as problematic. Emily's interest in drawing doesn't attempt to essentialize drawing. It doesn't necessarily see drawings as something that need to be recuperated. It doesn't oppose drawing with computing, and it doesn't attempt to formulate drawing's fundamental definition. Instead, the work seems intent on preserving drawing's most problematic features as both an artifact and an action, as both like and unlike digital modeling, and as both critical to our understanding of architecture and mostly secondary to the profession's material procedures. In preserving not drawing, but the problem with drawing, and treating it as an object of speculation, Emily's work seems to suggest that the kind of disciplinary coherence we might imagine drawing to have once provided might now be found in work like Emily's that cleverly manages to prolong drawing's problems. So, to hear more about these problems, let's welcome Emily Mohr.
Okay, thank you so much, Curtis. And thank you all for coming. I'm super flattered and super excited to share this work with you. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes, okay, great. So Curtis, thank you so much for the thoughtful introduction. Definitely gave me some ideas. And I just have a handful of thanks to get out of the way because I really am so grateful to be here talking to you all. So Todd, Doug, and Jackie for giving me the opportunity to do this project and the platform to share it with all of you. To IT, to Craig and Jeff, and their help setting up a private network to facilitate all of the Raspberry Pis that we ended up working with from inside the gallery. To the staff, whether Phil up on a ladder yesterday, or Carla helping me with like hundreds of Amazon orders, maybe the students that had to shuttle them from the front desk up to the mailroom. I appreciate all of you. And then, of course, to the students that helped with the installation itself, because there were so many of you. And some people helped for 30 minutes, some people helped for 6 hours, but it's okay. Either way, it wouldn't have come together without all of your help. Some special thanks to Sonia Kochar for managing the gallery so thoughtfully and patiently. To my structural engineer, who's also my sister, Sarah Mohr. To my graduate assistant, Brandon Doherty, who ended up being more of a collaborator, and to my partner, John Rickey, for being endlessly supportive of the project and is here today, even though he's also opening a fellowship exhibition on Monday. So let me know if you're interested in further details, because I think it'll absolutely be the trip. The trip will be worth it to see his presentation as well. So I'm glad that Curtis mentioned this seminar from last year, because I thought it would be a good place to start. Sorry. When talking with Stephen Turk about this project a few months ago, the LeFevre project, not this project specifically, he mentioned the sort of interesting connection between the title, so drawing drawings, as well as the sort of act of drawing, and then the way that some of these drawing robots work, which is to pull up on this cord, right? So it's sort of like drawing like a bucket out of a well, or drawing upwards. So it sort of works in a lot of ways. Similar to the way that the hanging of this tapestry went last year for our drawing seminar. And so one of the reasons why I'm so interested in it and was really struck by the installation of it last year was because it added this like tactility to the drawings that I had not experienced before. So I've always been really interested in model making, as well as drawings, of course, but I think that there's a real disconnect between what we're doing to make work here in architecture school or outside of architecture school, and the way that it's actually coming into the world. So with model making, we'll often 3D print a handful of parts, we'll build some of them out of foam core and sort of glue it all together, and it doesn't come all from one place. Whereas with a digital drawing, you make it in a lot of different ways digitally, but then it comes out of the plotter. It's a sort of one-step process. So I was really struck by the way that just giving the drawings a different texture gave me all of these ideas about the project that I ended up doing this year. So I started the fellowship last semester with this first drawing, which we actually did on the 3-axis mill in the shop. It's titled Door Swing House. It's a sort of large door swing, populated to be an apartment. And it achieved a similar effect to the tapestry in that it gave me the sort of texture and like unpredictability that I was really interested in seeing in drawings. And I was also interested in the way that the machine sort of added to the concept of the drawing as well. So I added these like sort of plus marks. If you can see my mouse, the plus marks to indicate like where the plane of the bed of the mill was hitting. So that when you see that there's meant to be a plus mark in a certain place, you know that there's like a little bit of wavering in the z-axis. So shortly after that experiment, Brandon and I built our first drawing robot. So this one lived in my office for a long time and was funnily the most reliable of all of the robots that we've built. First try was really a success. So this one runs through processing through this interface that's called Polar Graph Controller. So none of this is designed by us. It's tinkered with by us, but we're working with a whole host of open source information and lots and lots of YouTube videos. And so I pretty quickly moved from experimenting with the tools to trying to formulate what the project itself was about, because immediately it became apparent to me that using the robots to create the drawings wasn't sort of enough. It was an exciting process, but certainly wasn't the impetus for what I was drawing or what I was designing. So the purpose of today, of course, is to open the exhibition for you guys, for you to all visit it. So the talk is broken into 5 steps. The 3 components of the exhibition, which are the frames, the robots, and the drawings. The process of the installation of the gallery, which was a totally new experience for me. To be the one that designed the show and installed the show was such an exciting opportunity. And then the last step is to all get up, walk down the stairs, and go check out the gallery, because I'm really excited to share it with you and hear what you all think. So I became really interested in this exhibition at the Louvre last summer, which was about the frames of the Louvre. So the exhibition had a handful of frames that had their paintings in them, but a lot of frames that were shown without the paintings. And reading reviews of this exhibition and reading about it a little bit, there's all sorts of thought that goes into pairing the frame with the painting. So there are some cases where you sort of have the painting and you have the frame that are from the original artist and they've survived time. But in most cases, the curators are pairing frames with paintings, and it's sort of this, super specific process of how you just make these decisions. And the exhibition also is able to highlight the frames themselves, which are, super bumpy and super interesting, and are, their own works of art. And so I was really interested because some of the reviews of the exhibition talked about these sort of indications or different types of festooning that indicate where the frame is coming from. So maybe a frame that's coming from Northern Europe has a different type of leaf on it than a frame from Southern Europe. And then, of course, there's this mention of New World festooning, which includes ears of corn for column capitals. And then here, these are tobacco leaves. So I thought that this was a really excellent idea. And these exist in real life. This is at Monticello, this is at the US Capitol building. And this idea that you could sort of sample from and capture objects of your surroundings to make architecture. So then that led me to this George Hersey book, The Lost Meaning of Classical Architecture, which goes into great detail about how all of these different sort of classical orders and classical festooning, how that all came to be. So these are a couple of illustrations that sort of show the way that a temple might have been decorated for a sacrifice, and how these different types of festooning would have affected, the design of column capitals, all the different dentils and everything that you find in classical architecture. And I was really interested in the way that these sort of indications of place could make their way into objects that are designed. So in this case, caryatids or columns. So I thought, what better local festooning than pieces of Knowlton Hall? So, like Curtis said, I've been here for quite a while. It's not meant to be like a nostalgic thing, although I could see how it reads this way. But in past projects, I've been really interested in sampling and ready-made and sort of mashup. And I was thinking about showing you some of that work tonight, but I really think that this is a bit different than a ready-made or a mashup. It's really it's really a texture that I'm sampling from, that I'm taking from the site of the actual project. So I found the shingles to be super compelling. This sign that's, or sort of banner that's carved into the front porch that says Knowlton School of Architecture, and the text and the scale of that text, which was brought to my attention when I don't know if anybody saw this other campus building sort of east on Woodruff undergoing a renovation, and these enormous sort of carved text, pieces of text that are just like, they're resting on bike racks in this photo. And so I think it's, I was interested in celebrating something that maybe gets looked over most of the time. And all the while, like, frames and the design of frames is still sort of stewing for me. So I saw this gallery show of this contemporary painter, Dixon. And he's super interested in sampling like Renaissance or classical content in his paintings. But in this particular collection, he painted the frames onto the canvases, which to me defeated the point a little bit, especially after I had read about all of the exquisite frames and all of the process of like collecting the objects that go into those frames. So I decided to take the local festooning of Knowlton Hall and create frames of my own. So with a number of pieces of primitive geometry that were sort of sourced by loose tracings of the frames from that exhibition that I spoke about earlier, I began to sort of divide and mix up pieces of the Knowlton elevations, all at 1-to-1 scale. So we have the text, the Knowlton School of Architecture text, and the way that this starts to become abstracted and the text becomes more of a piece of geometry and less of a piece of signage. And then because things are nice in threes, and because the site, if I'm doing site-specific festooning, I can also look to other buildings that have occupied the site. So this is Ives Hall. Everybody's probably familiar with Ives Drive. It's where you get your delivery food. So Ives Hall predated Knowlton Hall and had some interesting festooning of its own. So these like 4 bays on the front elevation, as well as some of this brickwork that you can see in this nice photograph that I found in the archive. But I was also interested beyond the site specificity of Ives Hall in an identifiable unit to this surface that I was mashing up and using to create these frames. So unlike the shingles and the text and the other 2 sources, bricks have a known scale to them. And so they are a better indication for the purposes of this work for what the scale of the project is. So I went on to create 9 of these frames, and I'll just cycle through them quickly. You'll see them soon enough. All through a similar process, mostly without rotating any of the original geometry. So where you don't see bricks at the straight horizontal, it's because it's from an archway or one of these details that I showed in the image. And then a second way of framing that I began to think about was the frame of the gallery. And a lot of this idea sort of came from my feeling that the gallery is not a super neutral space. It has so much sort of festooning of its own, if you could stretch your imagination a little bit. So the enormous sort of mullions of the window wall right here, the sloped ceiling, the door creating a frame of its own. So I began to think about like what it would mean to create a space to look at frames where you could frame your view of the frames in different ways. And that also would consider the space, the gallery, a site of replica and of doubling. So another super striking feature of the space, I think, are the hanging sea channel, which we also see above us here. And so I wanted to replicate both the language of the sea channel, but also try to replicate the way the sea channel work, structurally. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. And so just thinking about ways of occupying the gallery through this model, which would also be a part of the gallery. So we see the model of the model and the model. And then a little preview of what the frames ended up looking like. And so the second component of the project are, of course, the robots. So I was directed towards this installation titled Mural by Dylan Scafidio, which was part of their retrospective at the Whitney Museum. And the project consisted of the sort of disintegration of the wall of the museum, which is like a very, beautiful piece of architecture that they are indicating that is like sort of always changing and impermanent and sort of introduce this timeline to the exhibition. So the exhibition showed a lot of their work. It's a retrospective, but this piece was for the exhibition specifically. And it involved a drill and a homemade robot that slid across the wall at random intervals and sort of slowly pulled pieces of the wall away and created perforation between one space to another over time. And so continuing to think about the robots, still the same one that we had initially built, I was super interested in this like variable of time that was added to the project, and also the variable of the like technology as material, which is something that Ashley Schaefer talks about a little bit in one of the essays that's in the catalog of the retrospective. So that the technology could be sort of a texture of the piece, something that's visible and present, as well as a piece, of the function. So around this time, we built a second type of robot. So this one had new challenges of its own, but we were able to begin to fit it into the frames themselves, which I'd already fabricated at this point. And like really paying attention to the form of the robots themselves and how that is part of the piece as well. It's not just the lines that it's laying on the paper and then you remove the robot, but it's actually part of the piece itself. And then the third part, the drawings that go within the frames. So these 3 examples, or sort of 2.5 examples, are of drawings that are looking at objects in a super literal, like one-to-one way, as far as what their presence within the architectural drawing is. So in this drawing of the Lawrence residence, Tom Main draws his glasses, which he's put down on the desk, into the drawing. And then there's a handful of these sort of like mashup piles of objects that end up informing buildings in the Architecture in the Age of Reason text. And then, of course, within the Robin Evans translations from drawing to building, he sort of debunks the projection of the ceiling onto the ground surface. And then back to the Diller and Scofidio reference, the way that within Slow House you might view a scene through a television screen rather than actually looking at it yourself. And so in deciding what to draw within the frames that I had created, I was looking at all these references and thought, why not just draw what the frames are framing? So in the image on your left, this sort of masonite or pegboard is removed from the frame so that you're able to see the joist beyond, the structure that I was mentioning a little bit earlier. And then if you use your imagination a little bit and look at the edge of the frame that you see here, you can imagine it being completed with the drawing here, and how the drawing within the frame is just simply drawing what's projected beyond. But with the drawing process with the robot came an additional type of texture. So here in this case, it's the sort of the spottiness of the Z-axis, which I think creates like this sort of beautiful like bald spots is what I was calling them. And the uniqueness that you get from creating the same drawing over and over again, maybe using a different marker or at a different time of the day when the Arduino is about to overheat and it's sort of freaking out. Or maybe here when you set the home point at a slightly wrong place and the entire drawing becomes a little bit of a funhouse mirror. And in this drawing, so pieces of tape that were like stitching the drawing together also become part of the piece itself. Misalignments happen, so the hatching that's meant to hatch around this outline of the bolt gets offset. And then a very dramatic misalignments happen, which was something that we ran into a lot this week while we were installing. I'll be the first to admit none of the robots are as calibrated as I had sort of hoped or expected that they would be. But nonetheless, I think that the quality of the drawing sort of adds to the texture that I'm interested in. And I mean, I think that the opportunities that that this process gives to work with different types of tools and different ways of printing is also super exciting for me. So if you're plotting on an inkjet printer, you can't print with white ink, obviously. It's just the paper coming through. So the opportunity to use black paper instead of white paper, and the way that the line weight can vary within the same drawing with the same pen, just depending on how you're calibrating settings. So this past week that we've been in the gallery has been a total whirlwind. Big difference between making a pretty large model and filling a gallery, but I'll admit that it's been really fun. So as I mentioned earlier, this idea to replicate the C channel with the wooden eye joists. So we actually got down to it and figured out exactly how this was going to have to happen and what we would need to do to install these and make sure that they could support their own weight and also the weight of the frames. So then we ordered eye joists and had them delivered. Over-ordered them, of course, so there's going to be scrap and extra around the shop for a little while longer. We experimented with a new way of getting materials into the building. The delivery guy called and asked, "What kind of job site is this?" And like I said, very appreciative of the student help. I couldn't have carried these by myself. And so because the drawing machines themselves are all about the sort of performance and the duration and the variable of time, and so I thought that went beyond just the robots themselves, and that the performance of installing the gallery, of setting up the joists, of everything is sort of part of it. So installing the frames themselves, which were first wooden frames, and then placing the white milled surface on those. And then I've got a few photos to share with you that sort of show the additional ways that the project sort of draws and frames within the gallery. The lighting and the materiality of the gallery was super important to me, with all of the profiles and edges of the frames themselves, and the way that those could project onto the ground to create additional lines and additional drawings, so that the sort of flatness of the frame becomes super three-dimensional, and sort of removing the frames from sort of living on the perimeter of the gallery to really occupy the center of the space and to create like a new type of space. So with that, I think that is the project as it stands right now. It is, like I said, always evolving, and the drawings will continue to develop over time. So definitely for the last couple weeks of class here, it would be great to come back and visit and check in and see how the drawings are doing. And if you're around over the summer, then as well. So that's it. Thank you.